Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Nature Journal Club's Writing Workshop Wednesdays. I'm Rebecca, and today I wanted to focus on National Moth Week because that's this week. So first of all, everyone is invited to introduce yourself in the chat or by unmuting yourself. Where are you from? What's your name, or what do you like to be called? And today our question is, have you ever caught a moth or butterfly before? Have you ever gone mothing at night, paying attention to what kind of moths or other insects come to a light that you put out? So welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to see you here today. All right, so it sounds like based on the chat, not a ton of experience catching moths and butterflies, but everyone, well, if you're here, then you must be interested. Some people who have gone mothing, oh, insect surveys in New Zealand, that's really cool. Yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for being here. So today, if you have some, either your nature journal or a paper and something to write with, or a voice recorder, that's what we'll need for today. So this is from, well, I guess I'll show you the website first. So let me screen share that. I should have put these all on the same screen, but here we go. So this is the website for National Moth Week. It's the 10th year this year, so this is about doing citizen science, observing moths where people live, and trying to find as many moth species as we can. Well, I'll get back to that in a minute with the FAQ question, but basically there are some different ways to look for moths. You can put up lights, see what they come. Everybody probably is familiar with how moths come toward lights. I think the reason that people think they do that is because they can use the moon to kind of orient themselves, but they didn't evolve to have super bright lights close to them where their perspective of it would change as they flew. You know, if they fly, the moon's just going to stay in the same place. But when they have a light and they fly and then their perspective to it changed, it's like they kind of get sucked into it. I think that's why people think they go towards light so much. But anyway, it attracts them. And so you can do that. Ton of different things will come to that. And then you can also put out some kind of sugar or food for them on tree bark, on tree trunks before dusk, and then come during the night to see what comes to it. And you can also find moths during the day that there are a lot of species. So when you learn about the differences between moths and butterflies, you typically learn that butterflies are awake during the day and moths are awake during the night, but that's not always true. A lot of moths do fly during the day, and butterflies are just one type of moth, as I'll explain a little more later. And so here are just some pictures from National Moth Week. Yeah, and then, oh, this last part says collect data. So you can take photographs, you can record what kinds you find, And yeah, so it's just another way that we can use our nature journaling to contribute to citizen science. We can record things just for our own enjoyment and our own memories of our experiences and our own learning. But if we share the information with other people, then it helps scientists to get a much clearer picture of the diversity of species around the world and how and the health of our ecosystems. Yeah, so here are just some pictures from National Moth Week. People doing mothing, recording what they find. Oh, this trail is called Lepidoptera Trail. I just realized that's pretty cool because Lepidoptera is moths and butterflies scientifically. Someone made a moth fruits thing. And yeah, I think we've all in our lives probably seen on a summer night when you leave the light on and you come back and there are just all these bugs and insects. And usually we just think of it as kind of an annoyance, but it can be really, really interesting. You don't need anything fancy. You can just leave a light on and then just pay attention to what comes there. So you can see this is so another thing that people do a lot is you can put a sheet up and see all the moths that come to it. Oh, wow, that one has a lot. Okay, so I'll go back to the slideshow. Can everybody see that? Okay, so I just pulled this from their FAQ page and it says, why do you guys care about moths of all things? Why should I care? And they wrote, moths can be important bioindicators. A bioindicator species or taxon tells us about the health of an ecosystem. A greater diversity of moths typically means there is a greater diversity of plant species, which leads to greater diversity of other species as well. They can help us monitor food plant populations, and they are important food sources for many nocturnal and diurnal organisms. Also, moths typically have a reputation of being drab, dull pests. However, that is certainly not the case. An extreme minority of moth species can cause trouble to humans, but most moths either have no impact on our lives or may serve important ecosystem functions, such as pollination. Many moths actually are very interesting patterned and colored. Moths are a world of sphinxes, hawks, owls, tigers, and scary eyes, all waiting for you outside your door, or perhaps in your home. And the number of moths versus the number of butterflies in North America, because I think most people probably care more about butterflies. They're very colorful, beautiful, widely well-loved. So in North America, which is where I am, north of Mexico, so just Canada and the United States, there are 700 species of butterflies, but 10,000 species of moths. That's two orders of magnitude more moths than butterflies. So a lot more than you might expect. And as I said before, so there are some differences between butterflies and moths. Typically, moths are at night or thought of, and butterflies are usually out during the day. Butterflies usually hold their wings behind them, like this, and moths hold them kind of like this. Does that make any sense over Zoom? I'm not sure. And moths usually have more fuzzy antennae. I'm sure there's some other differences I'm forgetting to mention, but it's also kind of a false dichotomy because butterflies, as I mentioned before, are actually just one type of moth. So moth is a bigger category, and butterflies are just a subgroup of them that evolved to be awake during the day. And butterflies are a lot more recent evolutionarily than moths. I think I just read that butterflies have existed for about 100 million years. And I'm not sure how long moths as a whole have existed, but a lot longer than that. Okay. Oh, then there are also, okay, well, I'll come back to micromoths. Okay, so this isn't just a moth workshop, this is our writing workshop. So I want to share a poem that I found that we can read together and talk about and do some writing of our own. And so I found, well, I guess I shouldn't say I found, but I recently read the book, The Lost Spells, which is not exactly a sequel, but it's related to the book, The Lost Words, which if you haven't heard of that, sorry, just a second. I'm very tired today. Okay. Okay, so the book The Lost Words is this book of poems about different species that was written a few years ago because there were a bunch of nature-related words that were taken out of the Oxford Children's Dictionary, and people were not happy about that, that these words like acorn and goldfinch and all of these different plants and animals were no longer seen as relevant to enough to children to be in the kids' dictionary. So they wrote these poems, or as they say, spells. It's kind of a play on words because you're spelling with letters and to kind of bring them back. And so then the book The Lost Spells is just like another book on the same theme. And so there's a poem about moths in there. So all the poems are acrostic poems that start with the letters of each one. So I'll just share that now. Okay. And why is it not scrolling? Oh, that's because this is the bottom. Here we go. This is the first page. It's just a picture. Okay, moth. Moth. This one soft word falls so far short of what the moth world means. Of moths in number, birthed by dark, to flock round torch and lamp and porch, together thickening air to froth, then cloth, then weather. Open up this soft word's wings, and out rush names and forms, a broth of colors. Cinnabar and scarlet tiger, frosted green and angel shade, bordered pearl and tamarisk plume, diamond back and clouded silver. Thinner and thinner wears the cloth, however, moths pass out of sight, beyond belief, their absence briefly noted, if at all, as distant memory, half forgotten grief. Hold moth names in mouth and mind a while, satin lutestring, willow ermine, feathered thorn and seraphim, forester and dusky clearwing. Sing them out into the night to give moths back their range, their flight. Okay, so now I would like to invite anyone to share, if you'd like, any thoughts or impressions of the poem. How did it make you feel? Anything that you liked or didn't like about it?
I have that book actually, and it is beautiful. The drawings are amazing,
Hang on, I can't
and
hear you. Can everybody else hear you? I might need to change my microphone setting.
oh,
Okay,
sorry.
so Mary Ellen, you can hear her. Let me just check my settings. Okay, could you try again saying something?
Oh, I was just saying that I have the book. Can you hear me?
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And the drawings are just gorgeous. I love just looking through it. And the poem, I mean, it talks about grief and lost names and things like that. So it's a little sad, I feel, the poem is. That's kind of the impression I took from it. And also, I had no idea how many interesting and colorful names there were for moths. I usually see them, but I don't know the names of them, and I try to look them up. But that's pretty cool. I like all the different names. And the book is called The Lost Spells.
Yeah, by Robert McFarlane, and I forget if there's someone else too. Yeah, okay, thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to share their thoughts? All right. Um, so if anyone does want to share, you can just raise your hand or mute yourself. Um, but what I would like us to do now is I've had some other writing workshops where we looked at poems and we mostly read a lot of poems, but I was thinking for this one, let's take a closer look at this one and try to read like writers. So we can read for a number of different reasons. We can read for entertainment, we can read to learn. So that's reading as readers. But when we read like writers, which is a very important part of being a writer, you know, whether that means you want to be a professional writer or whether that's just, you know, using words in our nature journal as we do here, and trying to use words in a more intentional way as part of our nature journaling. So an important thing is reading like a writer, which means reading a piece kind of with the perspective of not just consuming it or enjoying it, but thinking about how does it work and what is the writer doing here, and is there any choices the writer made or anything that they're doing that I could borrow and use. It's very similar to like looking at a work of art and just enjoying it versus looking at a work of art and thinking like, oh, how did the artist do those brush strokes or what techniques were they using. So yeah, I haven't myself really put a lot of that kind of thought into this particular one yet, but let's explore it together and let's just read it another time and a little bit more slowly, and from that kind of perspective of is there anything that we can add, um, is there anything that we can learn from it as a writer. Anyway, I think you just got here. So I'm not sure if you heard the poem the first time. Okay, so now you'll get to hear it too. Okay, moth. Moth. This one soft word falls so far short of what the moth world means. Of moths in number birthed by dark to flock round torch and lamp and porch, together thickening air to froth, then cloth, then weather. Open up the soft word's wings and outrush names and forms, a broth of colors. Cinnabar and scarlet tiger, frosted green and angel shade, bordered pearl and tamarisk plume, diamond back and clouded silver. And I'm having some thoughts come into my head about what I just was talking about. So if anybody else wants to, I'm just going to give a little pause. So if anybody else also wants to jot down some thoughts, you can do so. All right, I'm going to go to the next one. Thinner and thinner wears the cloth, however. Moths pass out of sight, beyond belief, their absence briefly noted, if at all, as distant memory, half forgotten grief. So there's a couple things that I'm noticing, I'm paying attention to the form of the poem, where the rhyme's happening, what's the rhyming pattern. Are there any particular phrases that jumped out at me that felt particularly meaningful? Okay, I'm gonna go to the next one. Hold moth names in mouth and mind the while. Satin lutestring, willow ermine, feathered thorn and seraphim, forester and dusky clearwing, sing them out into the night to give moths back their range, their flight. And then it ends with this picture. Okay, so any thoughts or observations after that second time that you'd be willing to share? So I can go first if anybody, unless anybody else really wants to. So okay, I'll just say first a few things that jumped out to me is the amount of the poem that is literally just the names of the moths. It's like their names are poetry. And then this is true for all of the Lost Words and Lost Songs poems, but I think it's really interesting how the poem is that acrostic. But when I always learned acrostic, it was like, in school as this kind of like, this is a very, very simple type of poem, that kids do. And that was about it, and each letter was one line. At least that's how I had always encountered acrostic poems in the past, and yet they expand the form so much so that each letter is its own page, and they can do so much with it, which I just think is really interesting. And we were on the third one when I started paying attention to the rhyme. We had briefly, and grief, which don't exactly rhyme, but kind of, but then we have belief here, which so belief, brief, grief. And it's not, so the poems does have rhymes within it, but it's not like a completely consistent rhyming pattern. So those were some of the things that I noticed. And yeah, when we do a closer reading of something, we can take their nature journal prompts. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, and we can apply this to things that we read too, as well as things we observe in nature. So any other observations or thoughts from this poem? And if after that, we can do some of our own writing.
Like you said, there's a lot of rhyme in this poem. And one of the features I noticed was what I think is called assonance, which is where there are like sounds within words that have a rhyme. So I really like the way that he talks about it being a soft, moth and soft, that kind of middle sound in moth and soft is like a repeating sound. And I just think, to me, drawing out the softness of the word is really interesting, because you get the picture of how soft a moth is as well.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few, like there's broth and cloth and froth within it. So I think there's that, and those repetitions of sounds, but I really like that soft word analogy.
Oh, you're right, because then soft is up here too. So we have soft, moth, flock, froth, cloth. Yeah, that's a really good observation. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. If anyone does, just speak up. So now I have, hang on just a second. I'm gonna pull this over to my other screen. Okay, now I have an article from National Moth Week, which has some pictures of moths in it. So we can look at those pictures. I was thinking about, I don't know if any of you were at that workshop, one of the workshops that David Lucas did with John Muir Laws a while ago. And he just basically, and they told us at the end that he had a ton more like pictures and stuff prepared, but we got through the whole thing only looking at a few pictures and drawing it and observing it. So I thought we could do kind of a similar thing here. I found this article for National Moth Week, and it has some photos of various moths. And so I thought we could just take a look at them and try to capture something about them with words. And you're welcome to do a little sketch if you want. Of course, this workshop is focused on words. So we have some pictures here. I also think it's a bit hard with just one still photo to really capture like mothness, because they're so alive and moving and fluttering. But it was kind of hard to also get a good video that really could represent that. So, or at least I didn't have enough time to fully look for one. So let's just look here. Do any of these pictures particularly speak to anyone? Any of these that you would like to focus on? And that's the other thing about photos too, is that we all come from different places. Like this is a rosy maple moth. I have a connection to this species because in college I had to do a field course. I was at this biological station for 5 weeks, and these moths were all over the place. So I love them. But that's the other thing that we don't get with pictures is the habitat, the ecosystem, the context. So moths live all over the world. I'm sure that we all have moths where we live, probably. But we all have different kinds. So if you don't know these moths already, they definitely did pick some of the more charismatic ones for this article, didn't they? So we don't really have a context, but that's okay. We can still observe what we observe from the picture. And oh, I just want to add here, I said I'd come back to micro moths. So these, so this, all the pictures here are like the Luna moth, like the very large, colorful moths. But there are so many thousands of species of moths, and many of those species are micro moths. So they're really tiny ones. I've been seeing a lot of ones like this lately that just kind of flutter across the yard and land in the grass, and they have like a long snout and they're really cute. But you know, if you think about if you kind of realize that they're there enough to pay attention to them, they're usually so small that I think for most of my life I just haven't paid attention to them at all. But they're all over the place and they're really cute, and I'm kind of into them lately. So we could look at some of these too. So if anybody does have a preference, like what pictures to look at, let me know. Otherwise, I will just decide. Does this sound good? Does it sound fun to everybody? Okay, great. You know, I'm just gonna leave it here because I like them, and let's try to find what we can that's interesting, even if they're not, you know, and the ones that aren't necessarily like traditionally or obviously beautiful, you know. So let's take a look at these pictures for a minute, for a few minutes, and I'll just remind you of some of the ways that we can break down this using words in our nature journal. So we can use I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. Let me raise your hand if you're not familiar with that trio, and I can explain it. We can start making observations with our senses. Obviously, we only have sight, but you could imagine the other senses, what you might be hearing or feel, the sense of touch or all of that. You can ask questions about it using who, what, when, where, why, and how. You can use it reminds me of anything in the whole world that it reminds you of, or that you could connect it to. And using words to explore those things. And then you can also turn it inward on yourself and write what you feel. And so you don't have to feel like you have to sit down and immediately compose, you know, a perfect poem or bit of prose. You can just jot down some words that come to mind. You can just make little bullet points, some quick phrases, half sentence fragments. You don't have to have good grammar or spelling right now. Just kind of getting your thoughts and ideas out on paper. And again, using the process of writing as a way to think more deeply about it, and to pay more attention than you would have before. So you don't have to start out with knowing everything when you first put your pencil onto the paper. Just start writing with whatever first comes into your mind or whatever you want to explore, and then see where that takes you. And I need to go get my journal too. So I'll be right back.
Can I just mention some things that I've noticed about the moth? I'm not a poet by any stretch. I'm more of a scientific writer, so
Yeah, go
I can
ahead. And you don't, what we write here doesn't have to be poetic. I should have mentioned that. It can
Okay.
be anything.
Well, the first couple things I noticed were the large eyes. Both moths actually have pretty large eyes. The colors, it reminds me of bark on a tree. And the legs are actually the same color as the wings as well. So I feel like that's a very good camouflage to blend. And one of the questions, I mean, I'm just amazed that the colors in the wings even give the illusion of the texture of the bark. And it definitely looks fuzzy. On the ends of the wings, it looks like there's little hairs. I don't know, I guess that's it. Just things that I've started to notice and wonder about.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think I noticed most of those things too, but I hadn't really verbalized it. So I think that's and I didn't actually notice the little hairs on the bottom. And yeah, so thank you. And I think it's interesting because now it's making me think about how it's like the idea that moths are unseen. They're like, you know, disappearing without even being noticed. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? They don't want to be noticed. They've survived for millions of years by blending in and not being noticed. So that's interesting too.
And that goes along with that line in the poem, if noticed at all, because they come out at night and most of them are very camouflaged and people just don't see them. So if they disappeared one day, how long would it be before regular people noticed all of a sudden they're not seeing moths because they're just not as seen as butterflies? But then you have all the butterflies, I mean the moths that are very good with camouflage, but like the one that you were talking about, the picture we saw of the rosy maple moth or the Luna moth, those don't necessarily blend in with anything. So what does their color tell us about them?
Yeah, if they stick out like that, is there, and what is the adaptive reason for that? Now I'm wondering if the rosy maple moth is sort of like warning coloration, like is like a lot of animals are like bright colors, don't eat me. That means I'm not
right, because they're toxic, or you know, just giving the predators a heads up that they don't taste good. And then of course there are a lot of moths that have the eye spots on the wings.
Yeah.
So I guess I've seen moths, but I've never like really thought about where I would see them depending on their adaptations, the eye spots versus the camouflage versus the bright colors. So all of that is really interesting. I think it'll make me look more closely and think more about the different moths that I see.
You mean if you hadn't thought as much about where you see them, you mean just like where, like locations or like in your life, or what situations, what contexts those different moths would be in?
Right, because I see some moths around my porch at night, and some, you know, I see all different colors, and some of them are very camouflaged, but where are they during the day? Like where would I see them during the day
Oh
that
yeah,
I'm
where do
probably
they?
completely missing because they're blending? But
Yeah, where do they go during the day? Do they go hide and sleep somewhere, or what happens to them? I haven't really thought about that before either. Hmm. Well, we're nearing the end of our hour. So I know that wasn't a whole lot of time to write, but you can always do more on your own. This is something to get you started. Um, is there anybody else who's ready to share some thoughts or observations?
I was trying to think about how to describe the shape of the wings, because we just think of it just like being moth wing, but I know that it reminds me of something else, um, which I rediscover every time I try to draw that shape of the wing. Um, and I realized it reminds me a little bit of sails,
Mm.
but then also that seeing the two of them together reminds me a little bit of a pair of lungs.
You're so right.
So I was trying to figure out how to call that. And then I don't know why, it seems like it should be such an easy shape to draw, but it's always difficult for me to try to draw the creature in proportion.
Mhm. Yeah. And
And
then,
yeah,
and that brings up the whole question of us, um, drawing can be its own challenge, but then if we want to describe a particular shape or size using words instead of a little sketch, how do we do that? And yeah, I think, yeah, metaphors can help, that it remind sails, lungs. Um, those are both good ideas. But then I also was thinking when you were saying that of how, just saying moth wing, maybe we do have an idea of what that looks like, but yet it doesn't fully describe all moths because they do all have different wings. So what exactly do we mean when we say moth wing? Or how can we use other words that are more specific to convey what do this moth's wings look like?
it also makes me think of, at first I was wondering, because I was thinking that describing the wing also helps me figure out how to draw it a little bit better once I get details cemented into my mind. And then it made me think, oh, even when we're using metaphors and whatnot, it's still a production effect, that saying it out loud makes it easier to draw it. Just the
Oh,
production
you're right.
all over again.
Yeah, you're right. And that also makes me think about how, well, first of all, if we do a little, it sounds like you are sketching right now. I'm not sketching, but that's totally great if you are. Because when we use words and pictures together, you were using different parts of our brain. We're learning more in a different way. Oh
It wasn't
yeah.
a very detailed sketch. It was just me trying to figure out how to call the wing and
Yeah.
thinking I could draw it, then I could sort of figure it out. And also just because I always have a desire to draw the wing because they're difficult for me for some reason. And so then trying to figure out what they were like, how I would call it, figuring out how the body fits in there. Also
Mhm.
figuring out like, why are they delicious? I went on a moth night walk on Saturday night, and this lady was describing about just a bit about them, and I couldn't write down fast enough. But one thing that she said is that they're delicious and that there's a lot of different critters in the world that eat moths. And I'm going like, who eats you? And does the powder bother them? Does it make them sneeze? Does the scales taste bad? Do they eat you as adults, or do they eat you when you're like a little caterpillar? If they're caterpillars, do they? Anyways, I just realized
Yeah,
that,
they're caterpillars first.
and I just
Yeah,
realized,
and that's also a good point, because there's a whole other part of the life cycle that we haven't even mentioned here. So they have to be eggs, they have to be caterpillars, they have to be cocoons, before they come out as moths. So, but yeah, I like how you drew it, and it doesn't have to be a full picture, but your purpose in that moment is just to sketch it, and then say, oh, I want to focus on this, sketch it to get an idea in your mind of the shape, and then think, how can I describe this shape with words?
yeah. And then another thing I'm wondering now is that because I've been learning a little bit more over time about butterflies, and I know that at least within Lepidoptera that there are more moths than there are butterflies. So it makes me wonder, do the moths have plants that they prefer too, just like butterflies? Do they have host plants that they like, or nectar plants? How many moth species have gone extinct that we don't even know about because they're in the dark? Just a lot of questions. And I see that Rebonto was saying that a moth has arrived.
Yeah, Rebonto, I could read yours in a second if you'd like me to, but yeah, I don't know in detail about that question, Eva, but I'm pretty sure moths do have specific host plants and nectar plants, and specific species they have relationships with and symbiosis with. And I think that's why in that FAQ question, that's why they're indicators. If there are more moths, that tells us that there are more species of plants, probably because if there were fewer species of plants, they wouldn't be supporting as many different kinds of moths. So that's a really important question too, is what kind of plants do these moths need to survive? You know, where do we find them there? So yeah, really good question. Thank you, Eva. Okay, Rebonto, I could read what you wrote in the chat. And let's see if we can figure out, based on the description Rebonto wrote, which moth it was. Okay. Spotty, stripy, local color matches bark, looks muscular, spike between eyes, tinge of brown at bottom of wing. A moth has arrived. Okay, so I think that it's about the top picture. Do you guys think, what do you guys think? Oh, Rebonto says that was correct. What I really like about this is that the top picture gives a really clear description of what the moth looks like. It's a very like scientific kind of recording. You know, you've got your observations. And it tells me a lot about what this moth is like. And that yet also your last line, a moth has arrived, kind of turns the whole thing into sort of a poem. No, you said no, literally just a moth has come into your house and is sitting on the curtain right now. Well, that's, well, it works really well anyway. That's good timing. Okay, anything else that you would like to share, Rebonto? Or anything you'd like to say? Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to share something? Either what you wrote or about your thoughts or how the process of this was for you today?
I was just looking at these little micro moths, just reminded me of when I was out doing a survey at night, and we were wearing head torches as we climbed up the track to where we were going to do our survey of what animals were living at night in a particular area. And the moths were just drawn to our head torches. And so in the beam of light, which was like a tunnel, you had these moths spinning around, drawn into the orbit of our lights. And they were actually hitting our faces there were so many of them, and so I actually had to take my head torch off and hold it in my hand because it was just too uncomfortable having so many insects hitting my face. But it just made me start thinking about how to talk about the way that they're drawn to light. And I was trying to come up with some phrases like being drawn into the orbit, the beam being a tunnel, and the moth spiraling in front of my face. Those sorts of ideas were where I was going with my moth writing.
I like the beam being a tunnel. That's really cool because to the moth, the darkness is that where it's the opposite. Like to us, a tunnel is dark. To them, their tunnel is that bright light that they are attracted to out from the dark. That's really cool because I can picture that. I can picture exactly what you were seeing, I guess, when you were being bombarded with the moths and your beams from your torch. That's really cool.
Yeah, any other responses for Jillian? Okay, I'll go ahead and share what I wrote in just a couple minutes. So I was just writing down my thoughts as they came up. I was looking at the top picture. So I wrote micro moths, defined by their smallness, but so much more than that, just at another scale. Other moths have beautiful names, but it's hard to find yours. The person in this blog post, wrote how they weren't able to identify all the moths because there are just so many species that it's often hard to figure out which species, although you can often get it to the family or the genus. Up close, your wings are shiny, loosely striped. They would be a lovely surface pattern on wallpaper or a bag or a daily planner, something in the background, unnoticed, but ever present and vital. What do your eyes see? You strike me as curious. And that's as far as I got.
I love that you mentioned that about the micro moths. And out of curiosity, I decided to, because just I'd forgotten about that term until you said it again. And out of curiosity, I decided to look up micro moth because I'd like to know more about them. And one of the first results comes up in iNaturalist and it says, this link is for those who are off their rocker and think they want to stab at IDing their micro moths. So I just like that, like you were talking about that, and that the term means so much more than just, the small moths. And then the fact that it just made a funny conversation with the iNaturalist thing.
That is so funny. Yeah, because the poem was about like the moths have these beautiful names, and then it's like the micro moths, who knows? But we can still appreciate them anyway. There are just so many of them.
Okay, I can say it again. It was from this link to iNaturalist. And so it says, Micromoth ID. This link is for those who are off their rocker and think they want to take a stab at IDing their micromoths. Sorry. That's why I think it's funny. Anyway, pardon.
All right. Any thank you for sharing that. That was pretty funny. Okay, any last sharing or thoughts from anybody? Okay, well, thank you again all so much for taking the time to be here today. I hope that this was useful or enjoyable. Ivea?
I'm sorry, once the humor starts, it can't stop. So the
That's
people
okay.
who go out and like look at moths and identify moths and are crazy at moths, but we call them mothers, like mother. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. I'll stop being
Don't be
disruptive.
sorry. No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, so just to recap, it's National Moth Week. So this would be a great time. Well, if you're in the northern hemisphere, I guess if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's probably winter. Well, and I know that it's winter right now, so maybe it's too cold. I'm not sure if it's a good time for moths there. But anyway, moths are all over the place, and we can use our observations and pay a little bit more attention to them and appreciate them. And we can think about how to use words to deepen our understanding and thinking about what we observe in various places. And the more that we do that, just like the idea of the poem and the lost words and the lost songs, the idea that if you do celebrate something and give it this kind of deep attention, that you can kind of bring it back more into the world. And so that's something that we can all contribute to, whatever it is that we're observing, whether it's moths or plants or anything. So I guess go look for some moths and enjoy the rest of your week and National Moth Week. And
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you, everyone.